Lads and ladies, it's time for me to reverse time, transcend the realms of Sorare, and correct the biggest mistake I ever made while playing this game. And that, lads and ladies, was going into the super rare scarcity. Now, I bought into the super rare scarcity maybe around 3 or so calendar years ago. It was before the classic and in-season split that we know of today, and there were still the juiced up thresholds that were once a thing of Sorare's past. So the value was still there at the time, considering what super rare cards were worth. And I recall I spent over £1,000 of the King's Finest to get a Challenger Super Rare Europe side. Essentially to be used in All-Star anyway, as that's where the thresholds were. Now, the first big mistake of this was going into Super Rare in the first place. As I say, my thinking was I already had rare teams going for those thresholds, so expanding into Super Rare to attack an additional threshold would yield more cash opportunities week in and week out. And while that's technically true, I vastly overestimated how difficult Super Rare would be, considering I was on a relatively small budget. As I say, my first Challenger Europe team cost me over £1,000 of the King's Finest, with most of that going on goalkeeper Etienne Vicenne, who, you know, nothing against the fella, he's a solid goalkeeper, but he was playing for relegation-threatened RKC Walwick. He was by no means a world beater or playing for a top team, and a good chunk of my budget had gone on him. Simply put, I didn't have the funds to actually jump into Super Rare when you consider that after the fact. And eventually, after a failed stint in Challenger Europe, I transitioned my Super Rare setup into the MLS. It's a league I know and love, and I have much more knowledge on, or so I thought. Apparently I didn't. And that's because I ended up swapping Etienne Vicenne Super Rare for a Christian Kalina Super Rare. The issue became my knowledge on the fact that I was unaware that when buying Kalina, he was expected to have back surgery, and within a week it was announced he would be out for 3 months. So that was obviously a super bad use of the funds and the trade value of my Challenger Europe Super Rare cards. Absolute nightmare, had a stinker. We managed to get through it and sort it out in the end. Eventually we got a mat-free Super Rare in net, to go with some decent MLS outfielders such as Kuipers and Owen Wolf. And I think over the last 2 years I maybe won 2 or 3 thresholds and a card here and there. I've had to put an actual value on what I won on those rewards. I would say that came to about £250, and that's at a real stretch. That's a push right there. And obviously against an outlay of £1,500, you could say that's a pretty bad return. But I guess you can't put a price on the fun we had along the way, right, gang? Well, you could. All the money I lost in between, that could be the price of the fun that I never actually had. It wasn't fun. Fuck Super Rare. But objectively, the MLS purchases weren't even that bad. Kuipers ended up being the top scoring Belgian player in a professional league last calendar year. Wolf won Austin's Player of the Season with some impressive SO5 scores, and Matt Freese has been one of the best goalkeepers in the MLS since he joined New York, even deputising for the US national team, with strong chances of actually being their starting goalkeeper at the forthcoming World Cup. But since the switch to primarily focusing on in-season play, all of the above has essentially become irrelevant in terms of preserving value for these classic super rare cards. Take Freese, for example. As I say, he's had a really impressive past few seasons, one of the top goalkeepers of the league, so in fact, he would be a desirable MLS card for anyone going out and making a super rare MLS team, and that's before we even get into the international utility he offers as well. And I ended up selling him for £80, which is under 10% of what I paid for him originally a little over 2 years ago. And I mean, what can you even do? Like, what can you do? That's the way the game is right now. So it's easy to say I should never have gone into Super Rare and so forth, which would be entirely true, of course, but it still hurts to have to take a huge loss on a strong player like that. Now, I think one issue, so to speak, if we call it that, with Super Rare is in the updated gameplay. The competitions only have one division. So in the MLS, for example, my mid team with, decent players like Kuipers, Wolf and Matt Freese in net there, they'd have to compete against the super rare MLS teams and MLS cards, the likes of Messi, Mukhtar, Diego Rossi, and so on. Especially then when you add on the fact there are minimal rewards to begin with being dished out on the leaderboard, it became almost impossible to compete at super rare level. Unless you had the money to back it up, and with no threshold being on offer either, it essentially became an effort in futility. There was no value to be had staying at Super Rare Classic. So this is where I've spent some time fixing my biggest ever so rare mistake, which was going into Super Rare originally, and that's by selling off the Super Rare players in my account. And let's be straight up here and honest from the get-go. I am no doubt a net loser from Super Rare. £1,500 spent, £250 back in rewards. There's absolutely no way I'm clawing back the variance from selling the Super Rare cards in my account. But I think this is where So Rare managers can sometimes get a bit stuck in their head, so to speak. I'm obviously acutely aware I'm making a loss here on my Super Rare players, and I think some managers can then get a bit sunk cost fallacy-ish about the whole thing, and they don't want to sell those players and essentially lock in that monetary loss. Maybe it's a bit of an unconscious bias in your head to think, I still have these cards, I technically haven't lost that money on them yet, as I can still win rewards with them. Like no, let's be honest here, you're not going to win any rewards with a bloody Jadar O'Brien Super Rare, for fuck's sake. It's a lost cause, and in this case, it's a loss monetarily for me. For sure, for super definite. 100%. Next segment, please. Woo! And that's something I've always been quite bad at in the past, especially when you consider the prices on Sorare maybe 4 years ago and how they continuously dropped. I think people got a bit caught up with what they spent at the time and not what the value of those cards would be right now. But I'm a changed man. I'd rather just sell the cards now, take the loss, but lock in the money, which can actually have a value for me going forwards. For instance, buying some in-season MLS cards in the next month or so. So long story slightly less long, that's what I've been doing, selling my Super Rare cards. Freeze went for £80 as we saw Kuipers. I got 34 quid for, with a little more pocket change for Roldan there at £26, and I sold some of the other wasters essentially for pennies. All in all, for this bunch, we got about £150 back into the account, so a decent chunk of money there. Obviously, comparatively, not so much to what we originally spent, but hey, happy to add that in. And that still does leave me with 2 Super Rare cards left to sell and trade off in the account. One of those players being Owen Wolf, who, as I've said, had a great year at Austin. We can see from his SO5 scores, he popped off for a good period, so that gives him a bit more value as a Super Rare Classic card. If we then check the market, we can see he has a floor price of a oneer, with Jadar O'Brien, my other Super Rare Classic card, being about 35 quid. So you might be thinking now, okay, that's another £135 of cards to sell right there. Except no, not at all, because the market lies to us. Super Rare cards are obviously harder to shift on the market in any respect, so there's almost more power for the buyer of the card than the seller of the card in most instances, especially for non-tier 1 plus players. Those mid players, there's not going to be as much demand for them, so you don't have as much power as the seller. And keep in mind, I've been trying to shift these Super Rare cards for a couple of months now, honestly, and perhaps these cards, hold a bit more value leading up to the start of the MLS season in the next month or two. But quite simply, I'm not getting 100 quid for Wolf, and I'm not even getting close to 35 quid for Jadar O'Brien. That's not their true value. So in my head, Wolf, I've settled on selling for any offers over 60 quid, and O'Brien, I would straight up just take a tenner. That would be swell. So all in all, for anyone who is short on the maths brains out there, that's about £70 of the King's Finest I'm valuing them at. We can see some offers here that I've been making to the trading accounts at Super Rare level. The top offer for a few La Liga rare cards, which would be easier to shift on the market. I wouldn't actually buy them, to use them in SO5. They just have a floor price there of about 75 quid and allow a bit more liquidity to sell going forward. This next offer is then for a bunch of MLS players that I would have been quite happy to have accepted in the end, as that would have really beefed up my all-star teams over the summer break when there's less European football on, so thinking a bit ahead there. And I even then put in a cheeky offer for a rare Messi Classic card, adding some extra cards and money to make it worthwhile to the seller there. But we can see these offers have all been cancelled, and that's because if we scroll down to these final 2 offers, we can see the top offer has been accepted. Owen Wolf and Jadar O'Brien Super Rare in return for rare Classic Salah and in-season Murillo and Jagazic, whoever the hell that guy is. I'm sure he's good at football, probably better than me. Either way, I wasn't looking at these players to trade and use in my account. I was simply looking at trading down the scarcities to allow me an easier time to move around in the marketplace and all in all get some cold hard cash, liquid cash, green cold hard cash, liquid money in my account. Ooh. So on the surface, looking at the floor prices here, it's pretty grim, let's be fair, but if I'm valuing my 2 Super Rares at 70 quid, we can see that in return here, I've got roughly 75 quid of players back that I can now sell on the market. We can check them out here in my account. My listings are worth about 77 quid in total at floor price. So I've got the lowest cards in terms of value on the market there. So, you know, hopefully I get some interest, and even if I accept some slightly lower offers, I'm probably getting anywhere from 60 to 70 quid back. And I think all in all, this is a solid trade, and the actual money will go a lot further in my account as opposed to if I'd settled for another season of obscurity at the super rare level. Because that's what today's been all about, right lads and ladies? Fixing my error that I made 3 or so years ago of diving into super rare, and I can now officially say, for the first time in a long time, I own no super rare cards, and I'm purely operating at limited and rare level. It feels like a load off a load. It feels like a boulder, a monkey. The fuck am I saying? Like a weight. A weight has been lifted. The weight is off my back. Fucking end this video now, you dipshit. And with the new MLS in-season card sure to drop in the next few weeks, now is a great time to have that additional money in my account. You can like and subscribe to see what MLS cards I end up getting, and I'll catch you next time. And because I love you,